Our next renowned guest is Rabbi Simon Jacobson, who is going to give us a talk, and then we're going to follow with a question and answer from Mrs. Shani New. Mrs. Shani New has a degree in media and politics with a special interest in women's issues and was a member of the Jewish Task Force Against Family Violence and Sexual Assault for 17 years and vice chair for 9 years. Shani co-authored the book, Will My Rabbi Believe Me, Will He Understand?, which won a Gold Swaco Leadership Award. She has written a number of groundbreaking articles, and she serves as a board member on many different community boards and is a proud mother and an even prouder grandmother and a long-standing leader in Melbourne in the Jewish community. Our renowned guest, Rabbi Simon Jacobson, is a best-selling author. His books include 60 Days, A Spiritual Guide to the High Holidays, and The Renowned Toward a Meaningful Life, which has been translated into over 11 languages and sold over 400,000 copies. And it gives people a spiritual roadmap for aspects of everyday life based on the teachings of the Rebbe. Rabbi Jacobson heads a Meaningful Life Center, which bridges the secular and the spiritual through a wide variety of live and online programming. The Meaningful Life Center presents people of all backgrounds with the universal teachings of the Torah as a blueprint for life. For over 14 years, Rabbi Jacobson was responsible for publishing the talks of the Rebbe. Beginning in 1979, he headed a team of scholars that memorized and transcribed the entire talks that the Rebbe gave during the Sabbath and the holidays when notes could not be taken. In this position, Rabbi Jacobson was privileged to work in close association with the Rebbe and published more than 1,000 of his talks. Rabbi Jacobson is also the publisher of the largest Yiddish English weekly newspaper, the Algemeine Journal. And Rabbi Jacobson is one of the greatest scholars and sought-after speakers in the Jewish world today. He lectures on psycho-spiritual issues and applying Jewish thought to contemporary life. In the introduction of his book, Towards a Meaningful Life, it says, no matter how accomplished we may be, no matter how healthy, happy, or wealthy or talented, at some point we all find ourselves seeking a deeper meaning in life. Never has this search been as intensely felt as it is today. Even though those words were originally published in 1995, they could not be more appropriate in 2020 with the pandemic that we are currently facing. Rabbi, welcome. What an honor to have you here. Please, can you tell us today what Jewish Kabbalah is?
Yeah, let me unmute. Okay. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. So firstly, thank you so much for your very warm and eloquent introduction and for having me in this special event. I know your time, it's the evening. Here in New York, it's in the morning. But this only goes to show us, which is a central theme of Kabbalah and mystical thinking, that time and space actually can be bridged and can be transcended. So here we are connecting different parts of this planet. Hopefully not just through technology, but also emotionally, spiritually, words from the heart, enter the heart, as the Rabbeinu Tam, one of the great medieval sages, tells us. So again, thank you, and I thank all the hosts for making this happen. I'm not sure, I wasn't here at the beginning of the sessions, but I'm sure mention was made that tonight is the 20th of Av, which is the 76th yard site, passing of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's father, who was a great Kabbalist, of Levi Yitzchak Schneerson. So honoring him and honoring the central themes and teachings of Kabbalah, let me give my own overview. I want to also thank my good friend David Solomon. Yes, I remember the coffee we had back in the old city. But even though time has passed, as I just said, time is not very relevant when it comes to deeper spiritual and mystical connections. So it's good to see you, my friend. And I thank all of you who are here. And hopefully we can use this time to not just talk about ideas, but come away with really personal and emotional and psychological applications and lessons from the Kabbalah that can improve and help us deal with our lives, especially today, as was just mentioned, the major global disruptions due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So let me give an overview, a very basic level, talk about Kabbalah. We just heard a lot about the history of it. So I'm not going to touch upon that. No need to review the same ideas again. So let me touch upon the actual meaning of the word Kabbalah. And again, this may have been mentioned, it may not have been mentioned, but I'll put it in my own words. We all know, especially recently, last 20, 30 years, Kabbalah has become a very catchword. If you look up on Google Kabbalah, you have millions and millions of results. I know from my own experience, traveling and speaking to different audiences, you stick the word Kabbalah on the title and you'll have double the audience. There's no question. Like I was once traveling somewhere where I was speaking about the topic of intimacy and sexuality. So the host said to me, what would you title it? I said, just call it the Kabbalah of sexuality and you'll see what happens. So Kabbalah has become this catchword. Whatever the reason for it is, become like it captures somewhat the exotic, the mystical, the unknown, trying to make it very relevant. I'm not going to go analyze the marketing and the branding of the word, but I will say that despite the fact that it's so popular, many people don't even know what the word means. What does the word Kabbalah mean? What does the word Kabbalah mean? I remember I was giving a class in New York City. It was the Open Center. It was a type of holistic spiritual center for people of all backgrounds and all faiths or no faith. And I remember the host suggested, let's do Introduction to Kabbalah, or Kabbalah for Beginners, I think was what they called it. So it was a nice crowd showed up, probably 80 to 90 people. The next time around, I suggested to her, I said, call it Advanced Kabbalah. And it was called Advanced Kabbalah, and 400 people showed up. Because I guess they thought they're already not beginners any longer, advanced. But what does the word Kabbalah mean? The word Kabbalah literally means to receive. It means reception. And it has two significant elements why Kabbalah is called reception. Because you would think if it's the mystical teachings, we have a name for it called Sod. The Torah has 4 different dimensions of study. Pshat, the literal. You have the homiletic, the Pshat Remez, which is like allegorical and metaphorical. You have the homiletic, which is drush, and you like Talmudic. And then you have Sod, the esoteric, the mysterious, the secret. So the word Kabbalah seems like a strange word to use, to reception. Well, the reason is very significant. First simple reason is because Kabbalah emphasizes the need to receive from a previous teacher. Teacher to student, to teacher to student, generation after generation. In other words, even though all knowledge, including Talmudic knowledge, and all schools of thought for that matter, whether it's mathematics or astronomy or medicine or biology, always you need to follow those that came before us. We have teachers. As students, we listen to them. But here, the name itself tells us that Kabbalah, it's vital that you receive it from someone. You receive it from someone before you. Why is it so important? Because of its spiritual nature, the integrity, to preserve the integrity, it's necessary to have a master who taught the student. In all schools of thought, as I just mentioned, we need a teacher, but it's not quite as significant because of the subtleties. It's so easy to misunderstand due to the cryptic nature of the teachings, due to the fact that we're dealing with the esoteric, things that are not tangible. As soon as they're not tangible, it's very easy to go off on a flight of imagination and completely go off the reservation. Anybody can become their own mystic. So even though we all have a spiritual side to us, which we'll be talking about in a moment, but it's vital that every person receives from the one before. But there's even a more important element to why it's called Kabbalah. And that is that you have to be in a receptive mode in order to truly appreciate these teachings. It's not just an academic study. It's vital that we be absorbing these ideas. Ego and Kabbalah don't go hand in hand. The truth is, ego can distort any system. When a person is biased or prejudiced, it's not helpful for the objectivity of any truth. But in Kabbalah, it is absolutely necessary and critical. Because if you're not in a receptive mode, if you think you're smart, if you think you already know it, you will not be able to truly absorb and channel spiritual energy. And since Kabbalah talks about the spirit, it is absolutely critical that a person be in a Kabbalah state of mind, which is receptivity. They say that Bertrand Russell, the great ethicist and philosopher, social scientist, was a professor of ethics, I believe, at Cambridge. And he was once caught doing something unethical. He did something really immoral. So his the faculty and his peers came to him and his colleagues and said, Professor Russell, you're a professor of ethics and morals. How could you behave in such a way? And his response was, I'm also a professor of mathematics and I'm not a triangle. In other words, I teach what I am and what I teach are not necessarily the same thing. Which is a way in almost a unspoken statement in a lot of academic circles. Listen to what I say, not to what I do. Maimonides, in stark contrast, writes a beautiful statement. He says, when you want to know who's a wise person, so how do you know? What are the criteria for wisdom? So most of us would say someone who has a brilliant mind, someone who has oratory skills, someone who can deduce well, can make a case, can build a theory, explain it well, and so on. Basically, intellectual aptitude and faculties. Says Maimonides, no. You want to know who's a wise person? Look at how they walk, how they talk, how they deal with simple pedestrian matters, how they sleep, how they eat, how they communicate with regular people. Because wisdom is not just an academic, intellectual, cognitive system. True wisdom means it permeates you, that you become a walking and talking and on an experiential level, a person who represents truthful ideas. And this is a vital point, especially in our day and age, where there's a dichotomy between knowing and doing. And in Judaism, there's always the emphasis that Talmud and Maisa, which means knowledge and action, are not two different worlds. One has to inform the other. Going back to the point of Kabbalah, it's about absorbing, that you become a channel, an absorber of a deeper and higher truth. If this was emphasized, I don't know how popular Kabbalah necessarily would be, because it's nice to go on a flight of fancy and look for the exotica and the unknown, and people love to hear about reincarnation and love to have previous lives and things that are not known. I remember somebody was once by the Rebbe, and the Rebbe was a great Kabbalist, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, son of his father, who was a major Kabbalist. And he said to the Rebbe that he's having these dreams. Can the Rebbe help him interpret his dreams? And the Rebbe responded, he said, let's first figure out what we should do when we're awake and be in control and responsible for our behavior while we're awake, and then we'll deal with our dreams at night. It was not because there's no interpretation of dreams, because it's very easy to escape and run into the unknown and avoid simple responsibilities. So that's why it's vital to understand that the soul and essence of Kabbalah is human experience. You and I experiencing a higher divine consciousness. Which brings me to a critical point. You know, it's always good whenever you're discussing a topic like this. There's so much about it. It's so complex. It's so esoteric and very often cryptic in the texts and how it's explained, that we sometimes missing the essential point. And a good, intelligent way to approach any system is to ask, what would life be if that system did not exist? What happens if we had no Kabbalah? God forbid. What if we did not study it? Why is it important? What fundamental questions is Kabbalah coming to answer? And I want to explain it in very simple English, in simple terms that all of us can relate to, without using any profound mystical language. And then we can talk about it more in mystical terms. Because one of the fundamental principles that I learned from my teachers, especially from the Rebbe, who I was makabel from. Makabel is the verb, Kabbalah is the act of reception. Makabel means when you're a recipient. What was the main thing is that if you cannot translate a profound or abstract idea in simple English, in simple words, then you may not really fully understand it yourself. We often lean back like a crutch on words, and we expect that we'll understand what we mean. So language is critical here. So what does Kabbalah come to address? What issue, dilemma does it come to resolve? All of Kabbalah. Whether we're talking about the early Kabbalah back to the Sefer Yetzirah, that some say was composed by Abraham, or Ezil HaMalach even earlier than that, or the Zohar, or the Middle Age Kabbalists, the Ravid, the Rambam, and Nachmanides, the Arizal, the Ramosha Karaviro, and those that followed. What issue are they coming? What is Kabbalah coming to tell us? So most people say it's in order to understand or communicate with the divine, but there's something much more fundamental here. And in truth, you could ask the same question about Torah in general. Why do we need a Torah? Why did God give us a Torah? What's wrong with every human being? We have a soul, and each of us goes on our journey in trying to seek the divine, trying to find transcendence in our lives, try to find something deeper purpose. So what is the real purpose in general of Torah, and specifically Kabbalah? It comes to answer a most complex conundrum, and that is, can God and us, can God and existence, can God and the human being join and partner? Because obviously, philosophically and theologically, there's a fundamental problem. We're talking about two opposites in every possible way, in every possible extreme. The immortal and the mortal, the infinite and beyond the infinite and the finite, the creator and the creation. So you would think there's nothing in common among us. Absolutely nothing. So how can they ever join? So it would be one thing if you said God created the world, created the human being to serve him. So we are servants. Like it says in the Torah, in the Bible, in Chumash and Bereshis, La'avda l'shamra. We're here to serve and to protect, to serve God. So then if the relationship would be like a master and a servant, or a king and a subject, okay, that you can say can make some sense, because no one ever asks a servant to have to understand or have a relationship with his master, or a creature to have a relationship with the creator. Then basically the relationship consists of, I created you, I will give you life and sustenance and health, and your job is to serve me through Torah, through mitzvah, through being a kind person, through being a generous person, through virtue, ethical behavior, and so on. Then there's no need for a relationship. However, that's not the case. When you look throughout the Torah, you find that the mitzvot, the commandments, or I would like to use the word connections, is a better word, taken from Kabbalistic and Hasidic language, lexicon, that the connection we make is not just one of action, that God creates us and says, do this, do that, be charitable, keep Shabbos, eat kosher. It says, V'yadaita hayom, you shall know me. Know your Father in heaven. V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, we say every day in the Shema. Love God. Know God, love God, have an emotional and intellectual relationship with the divine. There is where the dilemma begins. How can we have a relationship? How can we ever know the divine? It says, his thoughts are not our thoughts. There's nothing in common among us. This is the dilemma that Kabbalah comes to address. Is there a place where we can meet? And the answer is unequivocally and absolutely yes. And Kabbalah is concerned with the method and the process of creating this relationship. So the big question that every thinker and every romantic and every poet and every singer is, how high can we reach? You know, we look up to the heavens and we seek, how far can I go? Is there a limit? Is there a glass ceiling to how high a human being can reach. And many have come to the conclusion we can only go that high. The Kabbalah, and especially as it's developed, what I would call contemporary Kabbalah in the language of Hasidic thought, tells us there is no limit. Because God created the human being in the divine image. That's a critical statement. No other creature was created in the divine image. Everything was created by the divine and therefore has divine energy. But in the image of the divine, which means that though God has no image, which is so fundamental to Jewish thought, but God manifested what we call godliness, divine energy manifested in a structure, and that structure, that divine structure, is where the meeting place, where the human and the divine join, to the point they can even marry. We call Sinai marriage. A marriage, the example of a marriage is partners, a couple, with each one complementing the other. Of course, this opens up a whole new series of questions. How? How is that possible? It would be much simpler to say God is beyond us, we're down here, God is there, so to speak. And we, in our own little human mortal way, try to connect to some extent. But to say that there's a partnership, that there's an actual joining and fusion, that is what creates the complexities that Kabbalah comes to resolve. So in simple English again, the whole Kabbalistic teachings are creating stepping stones, like a ladder. Think of it like a ladder that allows us to join, not just to touch, but to join hands where God and us become partners in existence. Shutaf lahakadosh baruch hu b'maaseh bereshis is an expression in the Talmud. To become a partner with God in the whole unfolding of this glorious drama called life and existence. And with all the complexities and all the pain and suffering that life consists of, as well as the joys and celebrations, that we are not just bystanders, and we're not just observers, we're not just observant Jews observing, we're actually participants. We take initiative, we generate, and we have this symbiotic relationship, the divine and existence. And one beautiful metaphor for this is a metaphor, actually the one that my great teacher, the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the first formal and official Hasidic discourse that he delivered in 1951 when he assumed leadership after the passing of his father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, was called Basi Ligani, come to my garden. And this is a statement that God is saying to the human race and to every individual human being, come to my garden. My garden is my intimate place. As the Medrash explains, that the beginning of existence, the beginning of creation, the divine was present, consciously present in this material world. So when Adam and Eve entered, they had a divine experience, one that was conscious and revealed and actually palpable. But then, as the Medrash continues, once they ate from the tree of knowledge, in a certain way, the divine went into a concealed state. And every time a human being does not follow the divine mandate, basically when we betray our mission and our calling, the divine gets more concealed. Until the process reversed with Abraham, who began revealing the divine once again. So to put it in simple terms again, we are living in a universe that has two potentials. It could either become a jungle, a place of chaos, corruption, where we are hostile and divisive to each other, or it could become a garden where we may be 7.8 billion people on earth and counting, but we are all diverse musical notes of one cosmic composition. So using Kabbalistic language, and I'm explaining again in language that does not require any pre-knowledge of concepts and mystical concepts, The universe is a very complex machine, as is life. However, we were given guidelines. We were given an operator's manual. You could call Kabbalah God's operator's manual. In a sense, revealing for us a CAT scan of God's mind and plan, and telling us how to use life in the most effective way. So when you buy a machine, an appliance, a computer, any appliance, so you have a guidebook that tells you how you use this appliance, how you use this machine. Do A, B, C, D, and it will work well, it will hum along. If you unfortunately don't follow those guidelines, or you do something that's destructive, the machine gets compromised. What is physical health at the end of the day? A certain type of harmony of different forces at work. And if we keep to the right hygiene and eat the right foods and exercise and follow the guidelines that we call health, a human being, a human body will continue to be healthy. It'll be like a seamless flow between the soul's energy and the body's functionality. The same thing is on the level of the soul. The soul too needs nourishment, needs exercise. So the Kabbalah, which is then is an extension of and a dimension of Torah, that must be mentioned. It's not separate from. In many other mystical systems, for example, the Sufis in Islam were actually seen as rebels. Mysticism didn't always go along with the mainstream religions. In Judaism, Kabbalah was always part and parcel of Jewish thought. It was just a question who was aware of it, and so on. As the Zohar says, the Torah consists of two dimensions, the body of Torah and the soul of Torah. So Kabbalah, and in its contemporary form, Chassidus, is the soul of Torah. A soul without a body is not complete. A body without a soul is not complete. So when you learn the Talmud and you learn the Halacha, Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law, and the laws are the mechanics of Judaism. The Kabbalah is the soul, the spirit of it. And they go hand in hand. They join hand in hand. So what the Kabbalah teaches us, follow these guidelines. For example, the mitzvah of charity, the connection that we make when we're charitable and kind to another, which has so many subsets: inviting guests, visiting the sick, honoring people, respect, all an extension of love, showing love to another. So most of us would think love is a beautiful thing, and it's something we should all aspire to, and not follow our more base instincts, but be giving instead of taking, be selfless instead of selfish. But there's something much deeper. The Kabbalah will teach that when you love another, you're not just helping another. You're not just sharing your gifts and saying, since God blessed me, I will share. It actually is your own spiritual exercise, because you have in your soul, created in the divine image, a thing called chesed. One of the components of your soul is called love. So when you give love, you're actually exercising that spiritual muscle called love. And the same thing with all the other spiritual muscles, so to speak. So just like the body needs vitamins and minerals and exercises for different parts of the body to keep it healthy, the soul too requires nourishment. And nourishment comes through the whole system of what the Torah prescribes as being the way a person lives, not just physically healthy, but spiritually healthy. Essentially aligning yourself with the divine plan, which is provided to us in the blueprint or the operator's manual given to us. So as such, if you think of it that way, when Adam and Eve, what we call sin, the real word for sin, as the Kabbalists explain, is disconnection. That's a very different meaning. Sin, for many of us, is a very negative word. Sin immediately elicits guilt, punishment, punitiveness. The truth is, sin is a disconnection. When a person puts their hand in fire, God forbid, what happens? It gets burned. It's not punishment. The fire is not burning you as a punishment. It's cause and effect. When a person is not giving, or in the contrast, or on the other extreme, is actually hurting another human being, you're actually hurting yourself, because you're all part of one. We are all part of one integral whole. So it's not just about a mitzvah being a commandment and a sin being a sin. A mitzvah comes from the word connection, as I mentioned. And an avera, sin, is called from disconnection. Think of it as a form of dissonance. Cognitive, emotional, and above all, spiritual dissonance. So when we wander away from our own calling and we betray ourselves, in a sense, the divine gets concealed. When we connect with ourselves and with our destiny and with our calling and our mission and with other people, the divine becomes present. That is called healthy living. Healthy spiritual living and healthy physical living. All one seamless whole. To achieve what? As I said before, the ultimate purpose, a total joining and fusion between matter and spirit, between the divine and the human, between transcendence and immanence. And all of Kabbalah, no matter what school of thought, concerns itself with how do you create that union, that joining. And that is why in Kabbalah it's so vital to be a recipient, to be an absorber. Because if you're not in the absorbing mode, if you think you have it all figured out, if you're a filled cup, there's no room for you to receive, how are you ever going to join with another? Even on a very basic level called human love, marriage, it's only possible if there's an element of being receptive. If one person is completely dominant and doesn't leave room for another, you don't have a functional relationship. Unfortunately, it exists, but it's not functional. True healthy relationships, even on a human level, the first fundamental principle is what the Hasidic masters, using the language based on Kabbalistic ideas, is called bittul. It's a Hebrew word, bittul, B-I-T-T-U-L. It's very hard to translate because perhaps the English language doesn't tolerate the concept. But bittul is a form of a combination of humility, modesty. I like to translate it as suspension of self in order to absorb and receive something greater than yourself. That is the essential component. Without that, you can study Kabbalah and maybe even be brilliant at it. But like Bertrand Russell, it'll be an academic idea. It'll be a number. It'll be a triangle. It won't be you. For Kabbalah to truly achieve its purpose requires that receptivity, that absorption. So I'm proud to say that for many years, as was mentioned in the introduction, I sat at the feet of a great Kabbalist, the Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he sat at the feet of a great Kabbalist before him, his father-in-law, and before that his father, who in turn received in literally an unbroken chain all the way back to Sinai. Not one crack in the chain, because that's the key to Kabbalah, preserving its integrity. Who is your teacher? And who is that teacher's teacher? And not just because pulling rank and you have a resume with credentials, because it means that you received some of the fundamentals that are impossible to convey on paper. Because Kabbalah is so subtle, there are things you receive only that you can receive from teacher to student, and it could be passed on. What do they say? Every time I'm asked to speak about Kabbalah, I always begin with a little intro that says, hey, the ones that they say about Kabbalah, that those that know don't say, and those that say don't know, which immediately disqualifies anything I say then. However, all joking aside, we were told and we're compelled to follow the mandate that we were told, especially after the Arizal. Rabbi Isaac Luria, the 16th century, that the time has come to begin revealing the so-called secrets, the mystical divine methodology of how we create that union. And one of the reasons David alluded to, or said it actually, is because as we move on in the evolution of history, we come closer and closer to reconnecting after so much dissonance and so much separation and fragmentation. After all these years, the accumulation, and that's an important word, accumulation of all the energy generated by every good deed and every sacrifice that we and our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, and sometimes under the most severe circumstances, nothing dies, the Kabbalah teaches. Every good deed lives on forever. it releases an energy, it unleashes an energy that forever changes the world. So at some point this accumulates, and we're close to the stage. We're now in the 6th millennia, as the Kabbalists explained. This is like Friday, Erev Shabbat, right before Shabbat. Shabbat is when the garden and the universe turns back into that garden that it was originally meant to be, a full fusion of divine and existence, of divine and the human. But we're right now at that threshold because it's Erev Shabbat. Friday, especially Friday afternoon, we start feeling the spirit of Shabbos. We taste of its delicacies, and we prepare to enter that stage. That's what we've been told. So therefore, conversations like we're having now, conference like this, a discussion like this, is vital because each of us is necessary. Whatever the divine mysterious plan we'll never understand fully. But we are here now and today, in this day and age, in the year 2020. Ironically, a year that was meant to be a year of 2020 vision ends up being a year that most of us have no vision at all, and we're clueless what's going to be in a week from now, let alone a few months from now. But as the Kabbalists teach us, this is a period of transition. Whenever there's disruption, always be aware that for a chick to come out of an egg, the egg has to crack. So we have to be wise and not focus on the cracks, but focus on the light that shines through them. This is all part of the Kabbalistic perspective, how we look at life. So we're at a stage now where we should be not just watching and observing. Each of us has to be that makabel, has to be that recipient. It's interesting, the greatest compliment you can give to a scholar in Judaism is, you know what? Not that he's a wise person, that he's a Talmid Chacham. A Talmid Chacham, what does that mean? The student of wisdom, the student of a wise person. The greatest scholars always remain a student. Because as much as you know, you are absorbing and extending and channeling wisdom and knowledge and truths that are greater than yourself. That's the essential message. And then you become a proper conduit to be that bridge. When we, each of us, do our part, align our beings, our physical, personal lives, right now, today, tomorrow, we align it to the spiritual mandate and mission that each of us is given, we are doing our part in creating that fusion. That is the essence of all Kabbalah. Applying it to our personal lives. Yes, it has profound teachings and very esoteric teachings, as I pointed out, but it all comes down to, where does heaven meet earth? Right at your doorstep, right in your heart, right in your soul. I'm not sure what the time is and schedule here. Maybe the host can tell us what the timing is.
I'll jump in here and say thank you, Rabbi Jacobson, for your beautiful, beautiful words. You know, we are.
Well, let me just, if you don't mind, let me just, if that's the case, let me just say I just want to conclude one line here. I apologize. I just want to know what the time was. Okay, so my friends, so I wanted to say in a concluding note, this is a historical time, unprecedented. I don't know if there'll be a more significant event in our lives than this pandemic and all that it's brought, not just the health issues, but psychological and emotional, literally every sector of society being disrupted. I would like to say that a conference like this, a discussion like this, is meant to empower us not to feel frightened or fearful or to retreat, but to become active participants and initiate. This is the time. If the Kabbalah teaches us anything, is that to become empowered and to rise up and do whatever we can to become more connected and more loving to our loved ones, even to strangers, to use the technologies as we're doing now, to connect even more, even when socially we may be distant or compromised, and to find ways to dig deeper, to teach ourselves and our children that when we look back at 2020, we could say, yes, there was great upheavals, but there was also a great awakening. This to me would show true tribute to what Kabbalah is all about, and as well as this day that we're honoring, the 20th of Av, the Kabbalah of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Schneers. So thank you, and thank you for allowing me to just end with that note. Okay.
A pleasure, and I'll just reiterate my words of thanks because we are in a Kabbalistic state of mind, and we're all struggling to create that fusion with the divine, and your words really act as a guide and as an encouragement to tell us that we all do have the potential to actually fulfill exactly what it is that we're striving to do, and striving to make the world that we live in a better, more spiritual place. But I do have to say that I read your book, and I read the version that included the preface where you eloquently described the devastation resulting from 9/11 and the subsequent shock, anxiety, fear, and I was struck by a number of points. First, how current and prevalent your words are. You wrote that we've lost our sense of security, our naive certainty that we were invulnerable, and that when we think back over the events of that dark day, the feelings of terror, fear, anger, and outrage surge through us anew. You could be describing the situation we find ourselves in currently due to COVID-19. Although the perpetrators of the devastation that was and is currently being wrought are different, those words, your words, reflect so many of those emotions that you refer to as the deep, dark dread being experienced around the world. Many have lost loved ones. We fear for the health and well-being of our vulnerable. So many have lost their means of income, which will have long-term effects on their mental health, their relationships, families, and the uncertainty that we experience as we really don't know if we can trust the wisdom of the policies of our politicians and quote experts advising them. 20 years ago, it was finding weapons of mass destruction. Today, it's so-called experts on virology. But then I thought, well, it's been 19 years since 9/11, and we've proven resilient. Yes, travel will never be the same, but we've become accustomed to coming to the airport a bit earlier, to go through security in our socks. So it seems that we've rebuilt to a large extent. It looks as though we've adjusted and moved forward. This is both comforting and worrying, because does that mean that the human condition is to accept what is thrown at us, that we resign ourselves to the struggle of rebuilding our lives after each catastrophe, reassuring ourselves that after each cataclysmic event, this is an indicator of the Messianic age? The Rambam codified our belief in the coming of a Messianic era, and we've maintained our faith, but that was a long time ago, and we would be justified if we're feeling weary. And as this is a discussion on mysticism, where does the practical application of Kabbalah come into play here? How do we keep nurturing our faith and maintain a profound spiritual commitment?
Excellent, thank you. And thank you for quoting me. Yes, I just recently read the chapter on change and upheaval, which I added actually in the 9/11 edition in 2001. And I was also quite taken by how relevant it may be here to our lives. I think your question is right on target, and it couldn't be more relevant, because if Kabbalah is going to be relevant, it has to address contemporary issues. So let me say this. I'm going to just take a Kabbalistic concept and translate it into the pandemic of 2020, the upheavals of 2020. There's a concept called, and I'll use some Hebrew words, but I'll explain. Yesh, ayin, yesh. That every process from the beginning of the highest levels of divine revelation, all the way to existence as we know it, in our tangible existence, goes through 3 steps. Yesh means a state of being. Then there's an ayin, a type of vacuum, a type of void in between. And then it produces another yesh, another paradigm, another state of being. So essentially the concept of a metamorphosis. A caterpillar goes into the chrysalis, into a cocoon, and emerges as a butterfly. You take a raw piece of metal, let's say gold, you melt it and you shape it into a beautiful ornament. A mother gives birth. You need to go through the pain, birth pains, pregnancy pains. anything worth talking about requires shedding one layer of skin to assume a new layer of skin. The problem is that when we are in the middle of that void, we can get so disoriented and demoralized that we don't see it through. But if you take the bird's eye view, which is really what Kabbalah, Hasidic thought teaches us to do, to step back. You know, you look up from the bigger picture, you see that it's a transition. And I always think about the beginning of our 21st century. And of course, it's extremely tempting to immediately compare it to previous centuries. In the year 1920 was the end of World War I. We had no clue what the century was going to bring. And there was tremendous bloodshed, tremendous destruction, the Holocaust, of course. And we're not justifying what happened, but you look at the transition, what happened afterwards. So the key thing to maintain and navigate the course is to recognize that there's no such thing as an independent moment in history. Everything is a transition from one place going to another. It's the central understanding of the whole, what's called Seder Ishtalshlus, the cosmic order that Kabbalah talks so much about, how things evolve. And even David mentioned earlier the topic of the shattering of the containers, which is really just another way of saying a type of a transition where one thing is shattered in order to be repaired and build a better world. When you're able to see it through and hold on to that vision, we can make it through anything. Look at the Jewish people. What have we gone through in history? And I'm not comparing tragedies. Before this pandemic, we've gone through, you name it, the Holocaust I just mentioned, the pogroms, the Inquisition, the expulsions, the Crusaders, all the way back to Egyptian slavery, the Babylonians, the Romans, the Persians, the Greeks, the Ottoman, you name it. And where are we? We're still here. So we are a living witness that we never lost sight, that it's a journey. And even when there's a dip, and it may seem things are completely lost or we have no clue where we're going tomorrow, the journey is not over. So the Kabbalah teaches us about transitions and remembering that before the dawn is always the darkest, and a crack is always there to lead us to a greater and truer reality, to a new world.
So I have to admit that I had a few more questions to ask on current events, things like anti-Semitism that we might be experiencing. You know, as we're approaching Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, we face the very real reality that we will be at home, which is, you know, contrary to everything that we have been brought up to believe is the way to commemorate these high holy days. So I might just take a minute before I end off just by asking you, how do we retain our commitment and our connection to the kavanah of what these days represent? You know, when we're so trained to believe that you must be in shul with a minyan, with, you know, to hear shofar, to say yizkar, and yet this year that just might not happen. It probably won't happen. What do we keep in mind so that we maintain that connection and the awe that these special days inspire in us?
I'll say two short points. Number one, God runs the world, not we do. If God decided that he wants you stranded on a desert island for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, that means there's deeper purpose in that, and you can fully celebrate in that fashion. It is true that it was very comfortable to go to synagogue, hear the sermon of the rabbi, celebrate in the regular way. Of course, we'd all love that, and I'm not denying that. But that's not God's higher plan. You think God exists more in the synagogue than in your home? He exists more in a holy sanctuary than in your heart and soul? Absolutely not. So the first point is to remember that just surrender to a higher plan. And I don't mean surrender out of weakness. I mean out of strength. That's what God wants. And if that's what God wants, just as God may have wanted you in a synagogue last year, now he wants you to be in your home if that's where you end up being. The second point I want to make, that actually it's an opportunity to experience a deeper divine experience, because when we rely on our pre-existing structures and our comfort zones and our security blankets, then even our divine experience is also somewhat shaped by the regular, so to speak, the routine. How many of us get trapped in routines? I call it mechanical Judaism, by rote, robotic. Now we have to be innovative. I remember Passover was exactly the same challenge. Many of us, I remember, we could not do what we usually did. I had all kinds of plans. I go to a Passover program, etc. So yes, if you think about your discomfort and you focus on yourself, it may not be exactly as you planned, but put yourself aside, be more of a Kabbalah person who's receiving, absorbing. You know what? It's an adventure. Be innovative. If you have a family, get your children together, think about it, grandchildren, and say, what are we going to do Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur? We can't go to shul. Let's find a way. How are we going to do it now? In an innovative way, in a creative way. And you'll be surprised that you can find very interesting ways and connect to God in ways you never could have imagined. But we only do that when we're forced. We would never do it if we were just going back to our regular structures and patterns. Those are the 2 points I would make about this.
Well, thank you for your wisdom. And you spoke of chrysalis and transition. So I'm going to end off with your words. I will quote you one more time, where you wrote, our sages tell us that there'll come a day when our earthly reality will be a flawless mirror with its divine source, its architect's vision. We're now on the threshold of that day. There's never been a better time to reach people, for their hearts and souls are thirsting for nourishment, understanding, and love. Instead of using modern technology simply for personal business means, we must learn to use it to spread inspiration and goodness. I want to thank you, Rabbi Jacobson, for actualizing your writings and joining us with words of inspiration. And may we finally cross over to the promised threshold and realize true redemption.
Thank you very much. And it's really been an honor, and your words are beautiful. And being able to join together from down under to wherever we are in the world, that all of us can be part of this great revelation. And absolutely 2020 will be seen as the stepping stone toward the personal and global redemption.
Thank you so much, Shani, and thank you, Rabbi Jacobson. You are amazing, and you are definitely a student of wisdom, as you said. Thank you for teaching us so much and for highlighting our consciousness about the world and our place in it. As you said, the literal translation of the word Kabbalah is that which is received. And we have learned tonight that to receive, we must be receptive. We must open ourselves, creating a vessel in which to absorb that which we wish to understand and to grasp, and in turn become part of Kabbalah. Every darkness has a purpose of a greater light, and Kabbalah shines a light on the meaning of every darkness.